This is Cars and Bids. And today we are going to do a Cars and Bids market report. I'm going to look back at the last few weeks of sales, and I'm going to talk through my thoughts on the market for some of these cars, whether sales were high, low, weird ones, good ones, bad ones. Let's get started. Okay, we have had quite a run recently with a lot of interesting, unusual cars sell and some very good sales and a lot of cars. So let's just get right into it. There are a lot of cars in this market report. I want to start with the obvious. That would be the consumer car by designer Joey Reuter, which sold for $38,500. I didn't know what to expect when this car was submitted to us. I didn't know what it would sell for. I had no idea. Basically what it is it's like a weird concept car based on a Ford Festiva underneath, but it's like a box with a mirror on the front. There's no light. I mean, it's really strange. And I had no idea what to expect, but it did very well. It sold for $38,500. It got a ton of bids. There were a lot of people interested in it. You know, the art world is kind of on an upswing right now, just like the collectible car world. And I think that may have, to some extent, played in here. Very strange, very interesting, very unusual car. And I was really happy to have hosted it. Got an enormous amount of traffic, a lot of people looking at the car and checking it out. I didn't expect it to go this high, but truthfully, I didn't really know what to expect. I had no idea where this car would sell, but I'm happy that it sold, and I was thrilled to have it on Cars and Bids. What a bizarre and interesting vehicle. Okay, next up, another good sale recently, and these cars we've done well with have been low mileage survivor cars. So cars that have been preserved from their era with very, very low miles. We sold almost all of them for very good money almost every time. And a good example of that, this 1994 Ford Mustang GT Convertible came to us with only 265 miles. Weird. Why did someone park it and not drive it at all? But regardless of the reason, it sold for $18,000, which is pretty good money for a 94 Mustang, honestly. And it was a GT model, and it had a great color combo, red over white with a white top. I love the color combo, but it was an automatic. And obviously it hadn't really been driven. It's like a total museum piece car. But we sold it $18,000. I thought was a pretty good number, and just goes to show truly we are getting we're very, very successful with these sort of low mileage, kind of unusual, well-preserved cars from previous eras. And I think those cars are getting more and more interest and attention from a lot of people, and they've done very well on Cars and Bids. Another good example of that recently was this 1996 Chevy Impala Ss with only 16,000 miles. We sold it for just under $20,000. The market for these 96 Impala Ss's is definitely on the upswing. This car did very well, almost 20 grand, one owner car. Very, very special. Hard to find a good, clean 96 Impala Ss, but this was that. A great survivor car, never modified, low mileage, and it was cool to see it, and it was cool to see that it almost brought 20. You know, when I was a kid, these were $7,000, $8,000 cars, and they were only 4 or 5 years old. Now they are really starting to gain some appreciation with that old school design and, you know, this rare special car. And this is a final year low mileage example, and it did well, like a lot of these survivor cars. Okay, next up, another car very interesting for the market report. We sold this last couple weeks a 2006 Ferrari F430 for $86,000. To me, this was about a market correct price. It was an early example of the car, early year. I think 05 was the first year, so this is 06. Had some miles, almost 35,000 miles, which in the Ferrari world is considered to be kind of a lot. To me, though, the real story here is that 86 grand buys you this car at all. The F430 is a special car. To me, it is the only V8 powered Ferrari that really combines a mechanical old school feel with actual modern day performance. So like the 458, the 488, and the F8 are great, but they don't feel mechanical. They're dual clutches, they have good tech, they look more modern, it doesn't really count. The 360, the 355, the 348, those are all good cars, but they're not that fast, frankly. The 430 is the only one where those two things intersect. And I think that 86 grand, we're going to look back and say, I can't believe we could ever have bought an F430 for 86. I think if any of the V8 powered Ferraris are going to go up in value, and none of them will ever go up that much because they made a lot of them, but if any will ever go up, the 430 is the one. It still feels mechanical enough, but it still feels high performance enough. It is a pretty reliable Ferrari, which has been a good predictor of whether Ferraris go up in value or not. Testarossas have stayed down, 348s have stayed down, and some of the more reliable ones have gone up. But this car specifically, 430s are deals, and I think you should rush out and buy F430s, not even manuals. I know the manual is more desirable and it's better, but it's a lot more money. And frankly, the F1 in those cars has kind of a cool mechanical feel to it itself. But I'm just surprised. I think that the market for these cars is at its bottom and will start going up. And buy one before it gets too expensive, because you're going to look back 3 years from now and say, boy, I wish I could have bought one when they were $85,000, $90,000, $95,000. Okay, next up, another car that is very much worth noting. This 2015 BMW M4 Coupe sold for $36,400. I bring this car up because it is a great example of why you should go no reserve and how no reserve works best. So a lot of sellers are nervous about going no reserve. And when we tell sellers don't put a reserve price on your auction, some of them think, well, what if the car only bids to like $1,000? And I always tell them we have 100,000 users on Cars and Bids. They will not let your cool car bid for only $1,000. Not gonna happen. But that doesn't mean no reserve is for everybody. If you have a weird, special, interesting, unusual car, you're not sure if it will really be appreciated, I get why you wouldn't want to go no reserve. But if you have a car like this, you should pretty much always do a well-presented car with great photos, which this M4 was, with no surprises. So no like somebody's gonna show up on day 4 of the auction and say, oh, my sister owned that car and she rolled it over. Make sure it's got a good history and all that. And reasonable mileage. This car had that. It had 48,000 miles. And this car is a manual transmission, so it's the most desirable transmission. You present a car well with all the good stuff, you will get all the money, and then no reserve helps make it even more exciting, because a lot of people don't want to sit there and bid and bid and bid and bid if they're not sure the car's even going to sell. But in this case, you know it is. So there's like an excitement in the room. There's like heat. It's like, whoa, this is like electric almost. It's like, you know, somebody is going to walk away with this car at the end of the auction. And that is a pretty cool thing. And so if you present a car well and you have a good car that you're confident in, this seller went no reserve. That's a risk for a car that's worth almost 40 grand. But he did it. And he was very happy with the result, as he should have been, because he had a great car, he presented it well, he took great photos. And it's interesting to see some sellers are kind of realizing, hey, this is a way, if I really believe in my car, to maximize what I get out of it. And by the way, speaking of this car, the M4 market, you know, this is an earlier M4 15, $36,000. That's a lot of car for $36,000. Manual transmission's a fun car to drive, and manual BMWs that are high performance cars are never really gonna get cheap. They're always going to kind of be a desire for them as manuals become less and less common. Okay, next up, this is one I really want to talk about. 2007 Toyota Land Cruiser sold for $24,000. This was an interesting one. So the seller submitted this car to us and asked for a $15,000 reserve. And I mentioned that because he eventually took off the reserve and revealed it in the auction. Otherwise, I keep reserve prices private. But it ended up selling for $24,000. And he pulled off the reserve once it became clear to him that it was going to exceed the reserve. It was already clear to me. And I tried to tell him, like, hey, we sell a lot of Land Cruisers. There's going to be a lot of interest in this car on the site. You know, this is the kind of car you want to go no reserve. But he did do that, and I think that helped him get $24,000, which is a big result for a car like this. But this is a very special car. If you're in the Land Cruiser world, you know what I'm going to say. This is an 07 Land Cruiser, so it's the final year of the 100 series. Now, I personally love the 200 series Land Cruiser, which came next, and I don't prefer a 200 to a 100, but a lot of people prefer the 100. They think the 100 is the better car. It looked better. It was, you know, a little bit smaller, less bulky. There's a lot of reasons why a lot of people prefer the 100. Then, in addition to that, in 06 and 07, Toyota added a feature to the Land Cruiser called AHC, which I think stood for Adaptive Automatic Height Control. And it added some complexity. Like it wasn't an air suspension system, but it was like a hydraulic suspension system or something. But for people who want to own these and like take them out into the desert and off-road them in perpetuity, you don't necessarily want like a complex system like that. At the time, it made the ride more comfortable and whatever. And so most people got it. It was an option. Most people got it. But this car doesn't have it. So here is a final model year without the feature that maybe some people don't like. And that is a jewel in the Land Cruiser world. So even though this car had almost 170,000 miles, it still went for 24 grand. And I guarantee you the buyer was thrilled, because he knows you will never find another 07 Land Cruiser without adaptive height control. I bet 07 Land Cruisers are hard enough to find. It was the very end of the model run, and so they weren't making that many. They were prepping for the new car. But finding one without the height control is really, really crazy. And so that was a big car, big sale. And again, no reserve help. The seller pulled off his reserve after day 1 or 2, and that was a really, really big deal. And I think that helped propel the car further. Again, if you have a great car, presented well, with no stories, and with all the desirable things, you can see the results when you go no reserve. Okay, next up, speaking of off-roader type vehicles, I have mentioned in several of these market reports that off-roaders are killing it on Cars and Bids, and they're doing incredibly well. And there have been a couple of interesting recent examples. This 2005 Range Rover sold for $15,000. This car came in, if you look at 05 Range Rovers online, they sell for like $6,000. But this car came in, and I have an 06 Range Rover, and I know this market. And this one is incredibly well modified. No one is modifying these L322 Range Rovers, which were sold from 03 to 12. No one is modifying them for off-road. It's expensive to do. It's hard to gather the parts. A lot of stuff isn't made for these cars. People make it for Jeeps and Toyotas, but nobody thinks about Range Rovers. But this car was beautifully modified. I was so jealous when I saw this listing. I want mine to look like this. But anyway, incredibly well modified car. We put a pretty high reserve on it, but I was very confident, and it exceeded the reserve. And this proves, once again, off-roader cars are really hot. I've spent a lot of time reflecting on this. Like, why is this? Why are off-roaders so popular right now? And I think part of it, I think COVID is a part of it. People feel like they can't fly anywhere, whatever, so they want to get like a survival wilderness car and drive into the desert, go camping, do stuff you can do without, exposure risk or whatever. And these cars, these off-roaders, are, as a result, doing really well. And this car exceeded my expectations for what it would sell for, but again, I guarantee you the buyer is happy, because putting together a Range Rover like this with all these mods would take forever, and it would be more expensive than this, and some of the parts aren't even available anymore. And so I wish I could see this thing in real life and just gawk at how cool this off-road modded Range Rover is. You just so rarely see them, and I knew it would do well. And that, by the way, is also true of this 2004 Land Rover Discovery, which sold for $13,500. This car had almost 200,000 miles on it. And a lot of people say in the Land Rover, 200,000 miles, oh, that's a scary number. Well, maybe, but this one brought big money because it was well modified for off-road use. This thing is going to be capable of going deep into the wilderness, and that's what people are looking for right now. Off-roaders are killing it on Cars and Bids. Bring us your off-roaders. They will sell, and they will get top dollar. Okay, next car on the market report worth discussing. This is an important one. 2021 Chevy Corvette Stingray Coupe sold for $75,000. Now, this car only had 80 miles, so it's a delivery mile car. If you have been loosely following the C8 market, you'll know this is a low number. But if you have been closely following the C8 market, you will know that this is a market correct number. The C8 market has started to decline. When these cars were new, people were buying them for $70,000, $75,000 and instantly flipping them for $100,000 or $110,000. There were a lot of those that happened for the first few months. And that was especially true when COVID really started to take hold. Chevy had to shut down production, so they couldn't backfill all the demand. And a lot of cars were going for oversticker for a long time. This car, I think, did sell oversticker, but not by much. And that's the reality of C8s now. Frankly, I'm seeing them all over the place. I see them almost every time I go out driving any distance at all. Now, this isn't disparaging. I love the C8. I think it's one of the coolest cars on sale today, but they are coming down in value. And I think it'll only be a couple more months before people are even able to get oversticker for them anymore. There is kind of finally supply filling the demand for these cars, which of course is what General Motors was always going to do. So it's cool to see this car, cool to see it sell, but I do want to mention that, especially when you're pitching us C8s, people submitting them for us for consideration, you don't need to be asking 110 reserve anymore. Those days are probably over for the C8. Very cool cars, very special, but finally getting production going, and so the prices are dropping. Finally, in the market report, I want to talk about one car that did not sell. This 2014 Falcon F7, crazy supercar, was bid to $122,000 and didn't sell. What is it worth? I don't know. I will say this car got press all over the internet when we launched it. It was in Motor Trend, it was on Autoblog, it got traffic from basically everywhere. So an enormous number of eyes were on this car, and this is the price that it got to. I don't really know what it's worth. It was very difficult to put a reserve price on this car because there weren't comparable sales anywhere that we could find. They only built 7 of these, and it had a 6-speed manual transmission, and it had a V8 from the Chevy Corvette Z06, I think the C6 Z06. It's a really cool car. It looks awesome. I assume it drives very well. It was supposed to be like an American supercar alternative to, foreign stuff. And there have been a few of those like American supercar alternatives like Vector and various others, but this thing looked pretty neat, and it had a lot of power, and it seemed like it had the performance to back it up, but obviously they only made 7, so I guess it didn't really work out. But the point is, it didn't sell. I don't know what it's worth. I'm not really sure. But you got a lot of traffic and got a lot of interest in this car, and so, in that sense, it was worth it to us to host it. I'm sorry it didn't sell. It would always be nice to see interesting and special vehicles like this sell, but you can't always do that. But still, very cool car, very neat to check out, and I have no idea if we were too high or too low on the reserves. The seller should have sold it. I don't know. But it was there, and you had a chance to buy a Falcon F7 if that's what you wanted. But there you go. That is the market report on cars and bids. Some very interesting sales recently and some very interesting cars. We just keep getting more and more cars submitted to us. Our submissions are continuing to increase, and we're seeing more cool stuff and weird stuff. And I'm excited to see what comes next.